It's quite interesting. If you look at brick and mortar retailers who operate in an omni-channel approach, the proportion of revenue that comes from their stores is usually around 80% plus, and 20% of that is online or mobile or other channels. I think the growth trajectory that online has had over the last 2 to 3 years has been phenomenal, but I also think that there's that omni-channel play that certainly has a place in the market. You just need to walk around any major capital city and you still see people in stores, you still see people out there shopping with their bags. I think it's part of the entire customer journey, and I think tying that all together for the customer in a seamless approach and a seamless way, I'm not sure anyone's really nailed it to date, so I think there's a real opportunity there. I've got some interesting views on this one. Let's talk about the marketing automation landscape and the technology ecosystem. At the top, you have the likes of Salesforce, Adobe, Oracle, perhaps SAP. Their entire view on the ecosystem is around consolidation. So it's about acquisition or creating new products where all of those pieces of the puzzle sit together in the same stack, whether it be CDP, marketing automation, online search, or an ERP. And then you've got the players that are kind of in the middle, and Klaviyo would fit into that ecosystem where they have a couple of channels from an engagement perspective. There's a data layer that underpins it. There's others out there like the Yotpos of the world that will have reviews and UGC. And then you've got your point solutions at the bottom. I think irrespective of where you sit in that spectrum, the ease of integration with the systems and platforms that you use is of paramount importance. Everyone's seen that MarTech slide where there's 10,000 logos on a slide and there's so many logos you actually can't make them out. Being able to integrate seamlessly across those and then create that architecture within your ecosystem so you can spend your time engaging with your customer rather than trying to connect the dots, I think that's where we need to be. I think COVID really changed the way that marketers are engaging with consumers. I think it made customer acquisition easier than it has been historically, but I think it also created challenges around really retaining those customers from a long-term basis and creating true value within a brand. I think now we're kind of seeing a little bit of the fallout from that, which is perhaps some economic pressures, a greater focus on customer retention. And I think for the bigger organisations now, it's such a highly competitive space with international organisations and marketplaces that you really need to have a really strong customer engagement play to continue to grow your brand. We see a lot of them, particularly in Southeast Asia. I think Shein, one of the largest Chinese brands globally, have just announced they're going to release a global marketplace, and that would be phenomenal. I think they're an interesting aspect as opposed to the kind of brand.coms that you have historically. Amazon's obviously done it really, really well and been quite successful at it. I think they have a place in the ecosystem, but I think they're complementary to brand.com rather than being competitive in many ways. There are that many companies and more emerging on a day-to-day basis, particularly in the AI space. So you look on LinkedIn at the moment and there's 10, 15 companies being founded every day talking about AI. And we spoke about this recently. 10 years ago, AI was still a hot topic, and I think only now it's really starting to gain traction. And I don't really buy into the rhetoric of AI will take over the human interaction, but I think it will be complementary to it. There's parts for the human, there's parts for the machine, and I think if you can tie those two together nicely, you'll be in a good place. It definitely starts with the platforms that you're using within an organisation. And so Klaviyo recently released a case study with Saba, part of the apparel group. Sportscraft is in there and there's a couple of other brands in there. And they at the time were using a Salesforce platform which needed HTML coding skills to actually send an email out. And so they made a decision to move over to a platform that was deemed to be easier to use. And they've driven revenue by, I think it was 30% from an email perspective. They've got a higher customer engagement. I think the retention strategy is now more important than acquisition. Acquisition is obviously important because if you have a leaky bucket, then top of the funnel is dropping off. But I think a lot of the companies now are looking at additional platforms to drive consumer demand, whether it be reviews, loyalty is obviously a hot topic, creating engaged consumer experiences, user-generated content, search. This personalization topic has been around for as long as I've been around, and that's many, many years. And so driving true personalization at scale is not easy. But creating a connection between a consumer and a brand, I think can definitely be achieved, and there are a few brands that are out there achieving it, and Saba being one of them. It's how you use them that I think is important. So I think if you're doing the data capture bit right, the ability to then interact and then execute and action the data that you're achieving then falls on your marketing and your e-commerce teams and your customer teams to actually drive engagement through the consumer. I think if you're spending a lot of time trying to connect the dots between platform 1 and platform 2, or trying to generate a report, trying to create an automation. That takes away from the time that you could spend engaging with the consumer and understanding where and how they want to be communicated to. SMS is becoming much more prominent, but SMS was always in some ways a dirty word because of the cost associated to it. It's much more expensive than sending an email, so you have to be much more targeted with the way that you engage the consumer and the way that you use it. If you look at the core metrics though, SMS has a 4 to 5 times higher open rate than email. It's got a 2 to 3 times higher conversion rate than email. So if you used correctly, the return out of SMS can be quite pronounced and prominent. I think it's really interesting because you look at supply versus demand. There are a lot of companies out there that have a number of platforms that they're actually not even using, and they're still paying the service fee for it on a monthly basis just because it's there, or they're paying an external agency to try to maintain it or service it or provide it. I think the challenge that these organisations have is there are 10 to 15 different priorities, and there's someone banging on their door every day saying, I want to sell you segmentation or personalisation or loyalty or reviews or customer service or whatever it is. It's very easy to drown in that space. And so I think what the C-level are now looking at within merchants and e-commerce companies is where they're getting the most bang for their buck, so where the return is coming from, as they in some ways batten down the hatches in a challenging economic climate. And I think a lot of that consolidation will happen over the next 6, 12, 18 months before you see it really turn. I think marketers and brand owners now need to be really sensible with the way that they spend their money effectively. The golden days of COVID that drive incremental revenue, being kind without doing too much, are over. And I think this also is for technology companies as well as the merchants, the e-commerce companies themselves. You have to be much more cost conscious of your bottom line. Markets are no longer rewarding growth at all costs. Markets are no longer seeing favourable returns from companies that are perhaps not profitable, and valuations are dropping as a result across the entire economic spectrum. So I think being sensible with where you're spending your money, looking at opportunities for not just cost cutting, but value driven expenditure is really going to change the way that people do things.